So let's talk about the not so fun, maybe swept under the rug NBA news. I don't want to talk about the Summer League if I'm being honest. Because when it comes to the Summer League, I believe that it lies. And this is how I'm going to start the video. Because I've really wanted to talk about Summer League, but I just don't feel like every year it gives us a good representation of what we're going to see from certain players. So let's say for Alex Hart, which was the second overall pick, he's in Washington. He just had like a game where he didn't score any points, any rebounds, any assists, and he was just kind of trash that game. I don't think that Alex Hart is trash, but when it comes to this game, he definitely played like it. So should we go and in the same breath say that he is not going to make it or that he's not being successful? No. Bronny, a 55th pick, has not made a single three-pointer, and he shot terribly, and he's had some good games in terms of defense, but I do believe that when we talk about these certain people, when we talk about certain summer league players, I believe that there's a mix-up that people make, which is on one side they want to rate them, but on the other side they're not facing NBA talent. This is not who they're going to be playing every game, and this is not a system where they're facing the best players in the world. So in my opinion, I do believe that Summer League is a great opportunity for players to see them, to see their games, to see their styles. But I also believe that in the same breath that we could say that it is also a way for players to maybe do worse or better than what they're expected to do, and for us to just pile on them and talk bad and do all of this stuff even though we don't have to. So in my opinion, even though I do believe that there is some truth when it comes to Summer League and the results, I also think that there is more truth to just speaking about the game itself and when they make it to the NBA. So that was the first thing. But apart from that, let's talk about a few things. First, Pat Bev is out of the league. I know that for a lot of people this is not news, but I did want to speak on it because I do believe that this is a very interesting case of how personality could be the thing that makes you and the thing that breaks you at the same time. Pat Bev is a defensive player, defensive guard, and he was previously on the Sixers. His prime was with the Clippers, and he's been on all sorts of teams. And in the same way that he's been great, he's also been terrible at the same time. He's been a guy who has always been an effort guy, and his last team, the Bucks, was a team where he was honestly a kind of negative, and we saw him kind of, affect the team with his antics and the way that he played the game. The thing with Pat Bev, and I don't know if you guys have known about him, is that he is one of those guys that just doesn't stop. He will trash talk until he can't anymore. He will play defense like he's the best player. He has the confidence to go toe-to-toe with anybody. And in my opinion, he is a great player, but I just think that him being this anger-filled and not taking on a veteran role has kind of hurt his career. His age is 36, so that means he was already on the way out from the NBA. But I do believe that in the way like Kyle Lowry did it, where Kyle Lowry kind of gracefully, just stopped being good and people stopped expecting things from him slowly, is the way that most veterans and most players who've been playing for a long time should react, should act, and should hold themselves when they're getting to the age that maybe they're not the best player on their team anymore. The problem with Pat Bev is that he was kind of notorious for being a trash talker, for having an ego, and for really, even though he was a team player, never really being a guy who was good enough to warrant taking on some of those problems. We saw it in various teams, and now he's playing in China. I hope him the best of luck, but I do believe that Pat Bev being out is kind of a sign, as At the same way that you could get up by talking and by being confident, is the same way you could get brought down because of the same reasons. So I do believe that that's a good example of kind of like the difference between something like confidence and to a point where something just becomes annoying. On the other hand, for a player who's doing well, Gary Trent Jr. got signed, which is honestly amazing, as Gary Trent Jr. is one of those players that I do believe has been better in his position than anybody else. He got a 1 year deal with the Bucks, and as much as I do want him to be able to succeed, I do also believe that the Bucks need to give him a chance. Gary Trent is younger in terms of that he still has some years to play in the NBA, but I feel like the way that Toronto has misused him has been very big. Like, he's a guy who last year averaged 14 points on 39% from three and 43% from the field. But in the same light that he was used to be a shooter, to be a defensive player, he was also hidden under the rug because Toronto underwent this huge rebuilding process, which kind of messed up Gary Trent's contract year. He's going to Milwaukee now, and I do believe that he is going to have a very successful time there as long as they give him minutes. He's not a very ego-ish guy. He's a guy who adds a lot to a team. He's a guy who could score quickly, very quickly. And in my opinion, I think that they signed him to a 1 year deal to not make a long-term commitment. But I do think that Gary Trent will eventually be able to just have his contract, have his papers and in the NBA, and have a role which fits for him, because as much as I do think that he is great, I think that that Toronto wasn't the best place to show that. I think that they were kind of the worst. In other news, we have the Lakers hiring a new assistant coach. This assistant coach is now working for the Lakers as part of the staff. Lindsey Harding was a Sacramento Kings G League coach. She obviously has some experience, and as much as I do think that she is probably going to be good for the Lakers, I also do think that like this kind of coaching staff now that they have in Los Angeles is getting kind of mixed up. I do think that JJ Redick is going to be a coach which is going to have a lot of insight. But the problem is with his staff and the people around him is that there are a bunch of people who haven't 100% had their own coaching job yet. You know, well, there's two guys which are Nate McMillan and Scott Brooks. Those guys have actually been coaches which have won a lot of games, have had successful teams, and have been very consistent in terms of their output and their job, right? Like, Scott Brooks has worked all around the league as an assistant for different teams like the Nuggets, the Kings, the Supersonics, and then the Thunder, obviously, then the Wizards as their coach, then the Blazers, and now the Lakers, which makes him one of the more experienced coaches in the NBA. Nate McMillan obviously had a stint with Atlanta and was one of the better assistant coaches. But then they have guys where it's like you have coaches which are real coaches, which have had real involvement in team building, like a Nate McMillan, and you decide that what you're going to do is bring a bunch of players and coaches around which are not that experienced in the way that they play. I think that Nate McMillan was a great hire But I also think that now, with the new roster for the Lakers, bringing in a guy like Greg St. John, which is part of the Redick roster, and now Lindsey Harding, which are, even though they're experienced as coaches, they've never coached a team by themselves, or at least been the head coach, I think is a risky decision considering that JJ Redick, while choosing out his staff, is also coming from a perspective of a first year coach. But yeah.